Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Unversed podcast. Danny here. Today, I'm going to be talking about Goblin Slayer. So, Goblin Slayer is this relatively new manga. There's only 18 chapters, so we're not expecting a lot. Came out last year. Came out by Yem Press, and I think it's translated within the same month for the chapters, which is pretty cool. You could get the ebooks and stuff from like Amazon or probably the Yem Press site itself. So checked it out. I'm like, what is this? You know, the boy Miguel recommended it, and I was like, okay, that sounds like a cool title, like Goblin Slayer. Okay, let's check it out. And it starts off as a generic RPG world, right? Where it's like, oh, you know, you have your guilds, you have your classes, here's the ranking system, so when you build experience during quests, you know, you could rank up and all that kind of stuff. Very typical generic stuff that you can find in RPG mangas like this. And so we're introduced to this main cast, and they go out on this adventure, like, yeah, let's go kill some goblins. And then, you know, the receptionist is like, well, maybe you should start something smaller. And the guy's like, yeah, no way, you know, like, I've been slaying goblins for a while, you know, I know how to handle them. So they go. And of course, as one can predict, it ends horribly with pretty much everybody dying, except for the girl they recruited, which is, I guess, like, starting out, she is the main character in the first chapter, you know. But they all die because they underestimate goblins and all this crazy stuff. And as she's almost about to die, here comes this guy, and it's like, hey, you okay? And it is our main character, Goblin Slayer himself. Best way you could describe his look is he looks like your starting character for like a Dark Souls game. You know, basic armor, and that's brought up many times in the manga. And his actual hero name is Goblin Slayer. Everybody knows him as Goblin Slayer because that's what he does. He just takes quests, right, and just kills goblins every day. And it's good stuff, man. Like, the art can vary from very generic, let's use the term digital mangaka, right? And I mean, the reason I say that is because that's the feeling I get looking at this. You know, like DeadTube has the same feeling with the art style. Monster Musume, you know, essentially people who probably started on Pixiv, right, and then eventually worked their way into publishing manga. That's the vibe I get from these new waves of digital mangakas, right? And you can tell too because of the way they use gradients for shading. And even like their colors are digital, you know, not like, you know, like look at Bleach and One Piece back in the day and Naruto, you know, compared to now with these kind of mangas, like it's way different. But that's what I mean. It varies from the typical digital mangaka look to like an actual old school manga, right? When it has like these gruesome moments, you know, and the best thing about Goblin Slayer, the character himself, is that like he doesn't want to be a main character, and he's in a sense is essentially an anti-hero, right? Because it's like, sure, he's doing these quests for good, but then, you know, like it hits you right in the first chapter because they find baby goblins, and this girl is like, we're even gonna kill the children? And then he looks at her and says the only good goblin is a dead goblin, as he continues to like pretty much curb stomp and just murder these goblin kids. You know, it hits you, and it's like, oh man, this is what I'm gonna be expecting out of this manga. And it does deliver that aspect of him just thinking like goblins are just like gnats that we have to just kill, you know. And then, you know, it explains like the reason he does this is because his whole village and his family was murdered by goblins. And there is a side manga called Goblin Slayer Gaiden, right? And that's a very typical manga thing, and it's essentially, I didn't read it, but I'm guessing it's like probably a couple chapters of him as a boy, and then we see what happens like with the goblins. Like we actually get to see his past right there, and then we see maybe either him train or him starting out as an adventurer, you know. And you find out that he is actually, I want to say it's silver rank, which is the third highest rank in the system that they have in this world. So it's like, oh wow, like he's actually a big deal. He could actually be a big deal. And I do recommend this manga. I do think that it is worth reading. I mean, it's only 18 chapters. It's a monthly manga. You don't really have much to lose reading it. I read it in one night. But I don't highly recommend it, which I would say I would highly recommend this. But the thing that's stopping me is it's going a typical generic route that it needs to be addressed, and I'm fearful for it because I've seen too many mangas, over the past few years alone, just go down this path that just ruins them. They become the great concept, great characters, and then just go downhill because it's just such a typical generic thing. Like, well, I've already read something like this. Why do I want to keep reading this kind of thing? And it deals with them introducing new characters into this world, right? So we have an introduction page explaining these new characters, like what's going on. We have an elf, a dwarf, those are sworn enemies, and like a dragon race or whatever they called him, and it's just like you don't really see these kind of people hanging out with each other, like something must be going on, right? And then they show up and they say Goblin Slayer and I think Elvish or something in some weird language, and they're like, hey, Goblin Slayer, we need your help. The world is ending. This is not the first time that's been brought up in the manga, but they're like, yeah, world's in danger. We need your help because, you're a silver rank or whatever. And he says, no, like, I don't care. And then he brings out the point that is that the essential part of his character is that it doesn't matter if the world's in danger, we still need to deal with these small threats before the world's over, right? And because in this world, like, nobody really cares about Goblin Quest because they don't really pay out as much, and they don't, they feel more of just, it's a hassle to just deal with goblins. Nobody wants to do it. And Goblin Slayer is the only one that does it. That's why that's his name. And that's how he went to silver rank, I guess. He's essentially an expert in goblins, and I want to keep his character like that, grounded, and by introducing these new characters who are so different, who are so your typical RPG-esque characters, like main character material here, coming into this world. And now that the fact that they stayed, and it's like they're all hanging out with each other, and it's just like, well, the manga brought up the point that this is weird in itself, and now they're just hanging out normally, like this felt like a one-time thing. Then, like, sure, they knew each other, but they would never really hang out kind of situation. And now that they're showing up in the manga, and they're trying to drag Goblin Slayer into pretty much a main character position. They're just like, well, come on, man, like, you never really, you need to understand how an adventure is. It's so fun and all this, and he's like, well, if there's goblins, I'll go kill the goblins, but that's all I really care about, and it's keeping his character simple like that, I think, is very essential into this story, because you walk into this manga reading it, looking at the scenarios, the character, and you're thinking, yeah, I'm not interested in character development for Goblin Slayer. I could care less about that. He could just be Mad Maxing it the whole time, just hack slash goblins. What I'm more interested in is that kind of lore aspect, as in, like, okay, let's check out the world of goblins. That's what I felt like this manga was trying to do. It was saying, like, yeah, he kills goblins, and there's a lot of different kind of goblins that the normal person does not know about. Like freaking high class heroes. In one chapter, they were fighting goblin warriors, and they're just these giant hulkish goblins with these menacing weapons, And then this guy, who's super popular and like high rank, and he was fighting one. He's like, oh man, these guys actually know how to fight. They get caught by surprise, and I think that's the good part of this manga. And it should have kept doing that. And now it's, it's kind of crazy. This is, thinking about it right now, actually, it's almost comparative to Berserk, And sure, Berserk, Guts, he's great. The way he is now, he's fine, he's great. But I don't think I want that for Goblin Slayer. He was alone pretty much the whole time he's been a hero until like this girl from the first chapter showed up, and now they're partners. And now here's this whole crew coming along, and they're trying to drag him around. They're trying to make him have fun, and that changes the character. It will change his character. The fact that, like, in the beginning of this manga, we always saw him in his armor, right? It showed how dedicated he was and how determined he was to get rid of every goblin out there. And now we're seeing less of that. We're seeing more of him out of the armor. We never see his face. That's a thing that the mangaka wants to keep, I guess, is we'll never see his face. But we've, from what other characters say, we kind of know how he would look like as a character, but we're seeing him less and less out of his armor, which is kind of worrisome, because that slowly starts to change of the character, and then even on another scale of change is that potentially, there is an indirect harem going on in this manga, right? The main chick, you could kind of tell something could easily happen there, no problem, right? Then you have the childhood friend he lives with, that's 2. The receptionist girl, that's 3. And now this elf chick, right, that showed up, that's 4. And then if you could say this other mage lady, who looks something straight out of Dragon's Crown, right? So that's like roughly 5 ladies, showing up in this manga who have a thing for Goblin Slayer, and it's just like, holy cow, guys! Like, one more, and we have like a harem manga, like an average harem manga, and I don't want that. I don't want these characters starting to like act different, act weird when they're by themselves with Goblin Slayer, because all it ever is gonna be is just, them trying to flirt with Goblin Slayer, and Goblin Slayer is just gonna be like, oh yeah, is that so? Yeah, sure, whatever. He's gonna be so generic that it's just like, and then of course they're gonna be like, oh, he doesn't understand this meathead, very generic stuff. Like I don't know how many mangas you could read that have that in there, and I don't think Goblin Slayer is one of those mangas that necessarily need that. It'd be a waste, it'd be a distraction. I mean, heck, we had a chapter. There was a chapter that felt filler. It wasn't him going out killing goblins. It wasn't even him interacting with the main cast. It was just him helping out the receptionist lady at the guild with an interview for the next, like for a rank up, for these guys. And it shows parts of the world, sure, but it's parts of the world that I don't care for, that I don't think a lot of people would care for. It's just generic stuff, like stuff in a game that you would just pass over. Like you wouldn't really pay attention to like that cutscene or whatever, and then you would only look at the answers you would give, because it doesn't really matter at the end of the outcome of this situation, right, kind of thing. So yeah, there was that filler. Luckily it was only 1 chapter, but I honestly thought reading this, because I forgot how many chapters there were, but I was reading, I was like, oh my gosh, is this it? Is it over? I was like, oh my gosh, like, cause he just, it does that thing where he's just like, oh my goodness, like, I can't do this by myself. There's just too many type of situation, and usually in that kind of situation, I'm like, oh man, this was a short-lived manga, I mean, it was great, but I'm like, oh yeah, this could be a cool ending to see. And it's like, oh no, it's not over. There's just another aspect later on, and now it starts this new arc. There's a new arc happening where it's like, yeah, man, more adventure, more of these other characters showing up in Goblin Slayer's life, more of him changing. I mean, sure, there was a good part that I actually enjoyed, where it was the first time he actually went on an adventure, right, with the elf, the dwarf, the dragon guy, and the new girl, of course, and this new party that he's in. And they go to these ruins, and hey, cool, there's some goblins here that you could slay. He's like, okay, cool, that's why I'm here. He doesn't care about all this amazing stuff that's being shown that this elf girl really likes about adventures, and during that moment, and then, he's fighting goblins, and then out of nowhere is an ogre, and I was like, oh man, like an ogre. And of course it does the comedic thing where he's like, you're not a goblin, what is this? I'm going home kind of thing, but they still had to fight him, and he was putting some hits in Goblin Slayer, but essentially he got wrecked, one hit and he was down, because his part of it is probably his armor, right? I mean, he has very basic armor, and the reason why it's very basic is because, he explains about it, where it's just like, you need to be lightweight, you need to be agile, and like it looks dirty because it'll hide the scent from goblins kind of thing, and it's great aspects of a character that I like, pertaining to Goblin Slayer, but because of that, that was his kryptonite, essentially, right, in this fight with this ogre, and then he pulls out this badass thing that's like, oh yeah, that's typical of him, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty good, of how he defeats the ogre. And that's when he starts realizing, like, oh my gosh, like, I'm wrecked. I need to actually start taking care of my body and all this stuff. He's changing, and you have to be careful, because like I keep saying, it's like, if you change a character drastically, I mean, I don't know, I might just lose interest. I mean, if he becomes Guts, at the end, where Berserk is now, if he becomes the Guts of now, then I guess I'll be fine with it, but I'd rather have him be just early Goblin Slayer a little bit longer, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That's all I have to say, really, for Goblin Slayer right now. I do recommend it. Go check it out. 18 chapters. It's not gonna take. It'll take like an hour or two, to read if you read it all in one go. Art's pretty good when it wants to be, and it also does that typical digital manga thing too, where it has like, like the characters start doing like kawaii things, cute things, and they become chibi versions of themselves in small panels. And it's like, it's like, see, that's the stuff I'm worried about, because if you want to have the cute, quirky, funny stuff in your manga, specifically Goblin Slayer, honestly, you could have just kept with what he did in the beginning, which was, we only saw him in his armor. He showed up for breakfast, where he's living, and he was just eating breakfast with his helmet on. Funny stuff like that. He was drinking wine or whatever it was, out of a ladle, but he still had his helmet on. That stuff's funny. It's meme material potential, but to do all the typical generic chibi stuff, I'm not feeling it for Goblin Slayer. But yeah, no, it makes you interested in the world, as far as just like, well, yeah, this world is so vast and grand, it's like Game of Thrones here, you got dragons and magic and all this crazy stuff happening, and then on the down low, there's goblins, and that goblins actually do some stuff normal people wouldn't suspect. The fact that I was like, oh, hey, look, there's a goblin lord or a goblin king or whatever they called him. I was like, oh, snap, like, whoa, that's crazy. So definitely I'm looking forward to seeing where this manga goes. Hopefully it goes in the right direction, as far as they keep making the goblin aspect interesting. I mean, I know there's only so much you can show with goblins, right? Like, I think off the top of my head, like 2 or 3 times they showed the same scene to show the cruelty of goblins, and it's like, they didn't make it any different. It's just like, well, yeah, because goblins don't change, and I understand that part. But if they introduce new versions, right, like the new chapter, I was like, what are they gonna do? And it's like, oh, well, look at that, goblins riding a ship, like a pirate ship looking thing, that was interesting. I was like, okay, I could dig this. I could see that having these interesting variations of goblins because they're in different parts of the world, that could be pretty good. So we'll see where it goes. I mean, like, you know, my problems with the characters are just because they're gonna change Goblin Slayer, you know. But the characters themselves aren't that bad. They're fine on their own. You know, I think they're very typical characters that you would see. You know, I mean, the elf girl is essentially a lolly character, and she's very tsundere type of thing. And then you have this dwarf who's pretty much just Torbjorn. You know, let's be real, like, he's just a happy-go-lucky guy. And then you have the dragon race guy, or whatever he is. And, you know, he's kind of the man with the words. You know, he could talk in a very specific manner. You know, he has some sort of wisdom because of his culture and all that kind of stuff, you know. And then you have the girl, I forget her name. She's like this, not a spellcaster, but she is like of the holy church or something. And she uses, you know, the holy power to heal, cast barriers. And she's just generic, you know. She's just like, I'll catch up, guys, don't worry, kind of thing, you know, where it's like, oh, look, I ranked up. I'm not porcelain anymore. I'm the one above it. And I won't, you know, I'll make sure you guys aren't holding back because of me. You know, I'm going to catch up so you guys don't have to worry about me anymore. That's the kind of character she is, and it's fine for what it is. You know, I mean, I get it. It's whatever. I feel like there's going to be an arc where she's going to get captured, and that's going to cause Goblin Slayer to actually do something out of character. And that'll probably be the start of him changing. So, I mean, depending what they do with that, you know, it all depends on how they keep approaching the manga the way it is. You know, how much of the world is Goblin Slayer gonna see? You know, how much is he actually gonna change personality-wise? You know, I mean, he made one joke, you know, which was a big deal in the manga. And I think it is a big deal because if he was just left by himself, he would never make a joke kind of thing, you know. So, you know, we'll see where it goes from here. But, yeah, I'm definitely going to keep my eye on Goblin Slayer because I do want to see where it goes. It has potential to be a lot better than what it is now. But it's just like, you have to be careful with it. And I think making it monthly is the best route because then you can actually sit down and really think of how you're going to have this world established from here on after, you know. So yeah, go check it out. Again, you know, I'm pretty sure it's being published at the same time as the Japanese version, you know, like, and you know, it's translated, it's almost at the same month, I think. So you get the ebook or whatever, Yen Press, whatever you could find it at. And while we wait for the new chapter, remember, you can always email us at unversedpodcast@gmail.com for any question, comments, concerns. And, of course, you can follow us on social media at Unversed Podcast anywhere you go. And as always, we will talk to you next time.
찬 차라라라라 찬 차라라라라라라라라라라라라라라라 찬ジャックが仲間になった。